And continuing along that line of hypothesizing and wild claims and whatever, a couple of shows ago, perhaps the last show, I suggested that they may be hiding land. I suggested that we consider the concepts that were put forth by Admiral Byrd, who said that there was extra land above the North Pole and below the South Pole. And no, folks, this doesn't mean the Earth is flat. You can talk about extra land without believing the Earth is flat, okay? But an interesting thing in this, as many people have been reporting lately, is the old maps of Hyperborea, which depict the North Pole, apparently depict the North Pole free of ice, and they showed land at the North Pole. They also show Greenland free of ice and quite well mapped, and also Iceland free of ice and quite well mapped as well. But something else that they show, even if you don't want to consider the concept of that North Pole being there, these are reasonably accurate maps. They show river systems, towns, cities, mountains, all sorts of stuff on these maps. They're quite well drawn. But what it does show on these maps, and this was pointed out by a YouTube user by the name of Jon Levi, who does some really wonderful videos. He has a wonderfully open mind. I've just discovered his channel. He's got a very calm demeanor, very nice, open way of explaining things, and I really must compliment him on the work that he's done. But one video that I saw of his, it talks about land that is on the maps that show Hyperborea. There's a land called Friesland, which is on the map, but is not on any other maps. Well, it's not on any modern maps anyway. And of course, I will leave a link below if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, but the important thing about this is that Friesland doesn't appear to just be some random island. I mean, it's quite well marked with towns and river systems and mountains and everything you would expect in a well-mapped country. And it was obviously important enough to be included in a little side section on the map, and so are two other places on the map as well. One is called Sierra Sul, and one is called Sketland. And each one of these latter two is simply a tiny little archipelago right down on the edge of the map. And these are also important enough to have warranted their own little blown up areas on the corners of the map. And yet when you look at modern maps, these places, these islands, do not exist, and one may wonder why that is. I mean, there are two small island archipelagos in as much as the Faroe Islands and another island off the coast of Scotland, which could be these two archipelagos, but they look very different to the way they were mapped in the old days, so that's a chance that that is a possibility. But of course, even with that, the question would be, well, if these are just these two barren rocks that are there off the coast of Scotland now, then why were they considered important enough to be given their own devoted sections on this old map of Hyperborea? And even if this is the case with these archipelagos still on modern maps, Friesland is simply nowhere to be found. And the thing is that it's not just on maps of Hyperborea, the maps of the North Pole. There's other maps that you can find that actually depict the UK and the edge of Europe, which also show Friesland on the map. And when you look at them, they actually display the UK and the edge of Europe quite accurately. I mean, still discrepancies that aren't quite right, but reasonably accurate given the time of the map. And putting an island on there that doesn't exist, such as Friesland, is not really consistent with the level of accuracy that we see in the rest of the map. And again, the point is that we also find this depicted on more than one map. So it's not like it's simply been depicted in someone's fantasy of what the North Pole looked like, and it's just included on maps of Hyperborea. It's on other maps as well. And Friesland, really, I mean, it's half the size of Iceland, it's half the size of England, it's around about the size of Ireland. And it's depicted as being quite close to the United Kingdom, where it's depicted on the maps anyway. One might question whether these places are actually there, and if they're not there, what happened to them? Very interestingly, the maps of Hyperborea change quite quickly. If you look at maps from around the 1595 period, you'll find that there are four very distinctive places marked in the map of Hyperborea. And yet when we get to 1606, just 11 years later, it would appear that much of one section appears to have been flooded or gone beneath the waves, and some of the islands nearby seem to have disappeared as well. The question is, what happened? And as I said, that's over an 11-year period between 1595 and 1606. But then you look at maps from around 1622 to 1628 and there's nothing depicted in the centre. All the four land masses are gone, but you can still find on these maps from 1628, right down there in the corner is Friesland. So it's still there. And you've got to ask yourself, how easy would it be to hide a country? Well, all you really have to do would be take it off the map, and if the country was in a spot where no flight paths actually went over it, then you've got a reasonably good chance of keeping it out of the view of everybody. And if you look at where Friesland is, there's no real flight paths to go over that area of ocean at all. And it's just an interesting concept that there may be something there that nobody knows about. It'd be hard to go and look at too. I mean, it's in the North Sea. What are you going to do, fly out there in a light aircraft? It's not really going to give you enough fuel to get back again, and going out there in a boat to just check it out to see if there was something there. I mean, this is the North Sea. It's not exactly a friendly environment that anyone is going to want to go and investigate to see if there is a hypothetical landmass there. So if you're going to hide a country, it would be a pretty good place to do it. I'm not saying that it's there, it's just interesting that these maps exist. And the thing is, I mean, you might look at these maps and say, well, these are just fiction, but these maps are made by people such as Phineas, people such as Mercator. These are very, very respected cartographers who have been around for a long time, maps that we're still using today by some of these people, such as Mercator, still making world atlases today. These were the most respected cartographers of the time. And here they clearly show this country at the North Pole, and they clearly show the island of Friesland and the archipelagos of Sarasul and Shetland. As I said, Sarasul could be the Faroe Islands and Shetland could be this other archipelago that's off the coast of Scotland. But what about Friesland, and what about the lands that are depicted as being at the North Pole? I mean, are we to simply believe that the most respected cartographers of the time simply put in islands that didn't exist and put them on the map and mapped them so well with river systems and towns and mountains and everything clearly marked, even the names of certain bays, and just made it up and they got it all wrong? And yet these are, as I said, the most respected cartographers of their day, and cartographers whose legacies, such as Mercator, are still respected map makers and respected cartographers today. Are we to assume that they simply made a mistake by putting an island like Friesland there? And also by clearly mapping the region at the North Pole, which actually doesn't exist. And bear in mind, folks, that as I said, one of the maps that clearly shows the North Pole and Friesland is a Mercator map. Oh, sorry, we got that wrong. It didn't exist. It was actually part of somewhere else. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, folks. And again, I'm not saying that this land is there. I'm simply finding it interesting that this land is on the maps, exists on these old maps, and was so well mapped. Now, I've always found these sorts of things fascinating. As I've said, history was what first got me into this whole quest for truth way back in the beginning. I've always found these old maps to be quite intriguing. The fact that they show countries that apparently aren't there, and the fact that they're made by respected cartographers. It doesn't really make sense, folks. And the interesting thing about it, as I said, is that when you see the maps of the North Pole where the four land masses have been removed, you still see Friesland on these maps. So what's going on there? And if it was simply a place that was there and isn't there now, well, why haven't we heard about it? Why didn't we hear about this place that's sunk beneath the waves? When you look at all of this stuff, what you begin to realise is that none of our history is correct. That's the important part about it. Looking into all this is that the amount of inconsistencies you find begin to cause you to ask questions, and that's the important thing that people need to be doing, is asking questions. Now, if you ask the right questions, you can encourage people to ask the right questions, then the right answers will present themselves by default. It's just getting to the right question. And that is truly one of the big problems that we face today, is that people simply don't question. They don't ask enough questions. They simply roll over on command and do what they're told and never ask why. If people were to look at the system and simply ask why their lives are in the state that it's in, it would probably make a difference as well. But people don't even pay attention to that. They just think it's normal for them to be living in this state of debt slavery. It's what they've grown up with, so it's what they think reality is. And they never question it. They never ask about the monetary system. They never ask why they have to pay to be alive, and why we are constantly at war all the time, and why things just continue to get harder and more difficult. You know, if we have societies that are constructed to serve people, why is it that people are discarded so easily and so readily and so often within the constructs of these societies? Now, these are questions people need to ask, and they just don't. They're so busy running on the treadmill, collecting the paper they need to pay to be alive, that they never ask why that fee is required, why they have to pay in the first place. They just think that it's just the way things are because that's the way the world works. But it isn't, folks. It's the way the world has been constructed, and it's a very, very insidious system that could be healed very quickly. You know, we could stop all of this very quickly. I've said so many times we could heal the world in a day if people simply woke up to themselves. And that has been the point of these shows right since the beginning, is attempting to get people to wake up to themselves and simply see the fiction that they're swimming in. And see how easily we could change this, and how easily we could free ourselves from this control, but how easily we could stop all these wars and stop all this destruction and move in a better direction. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to do, folks. Most people think it's an insurmountable problem, but it isn't. You know, it's our compliance and our tolerance of evil, our tolerance of wrong behavior that causes this whole system to function. If we stop doing that, if we actually step into our moral compass, then the system can't function. It's really that simple. You know, in fact, it's so simple that people can't see the forest for the trees. That's the problem. You know, people want change, but they don't want to change. It's always really been the same old thing, hasn't it? But anyway, folks, I think we have reached break time here, so I better leave it there for now, and we'll go and have a break. Thank you for joining me on the air today. It's always a pleasure to have your company, and I'll be back to speak to you again in a few minutes.
So next, I want to focus on this very most obvious part of this map of 1595, which is this. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. This North Polar region. And again, Mercator gave us this map. I mean, maybe not this exact version, but when we started using this map, this is Mercator who gave us this. And he's a very respected map maker. And we can't assume that he was a fool and put this island here with great detail. And here in the center is Rupus nigra, is what he calls it. And this is the North Pole. This is a magnetic black rock, as it's been described in the text that we do have. I mean, there's a lot written about this, and obviously there's map making, and we can see this in hundreds, if not thousands of maps. Even in this map, we see it. Sweden and Finland. Right here we have Russia, and in these times Russia was called Rus. And this is shortly after the name was Tartaria. So already we see Tartaria replaced with Rus. But what I was going to focus on was these parts of Asia, which we would now call Mongolia. And just to have a reference, let's see what it looks like on this map. Make it a little smaller. So yeah, we're going to be talking about this area, Upper Siberia. And so yeah, let's have a look on the old map now of this region. And we see many towns amongst these mountains. Here and here a bigger one that appears to be a castle. Smaller but still substantial, and even something here. I'm not sure what that is. It's coming in a little grainy for me. And here we have Tartar Wild. These are the Tartar cities. So this North Pole, here we see we have Pygmies, a region inhabited by Pygmies. Now this I think is written in Latin. and these rivers. And as it's been written, and again, I don't have the writings here, but I've heard there's a lot of information, and these rivers were said to flow inward. I think maybe one or two flowed outward and one flowed inward, but it was as if it was a drain, and sailors would get pulled in, and it was very difficult to get out. And really fascinating. And only 11 years later, we now see a portion of this pygmy portion missing. It's missing, it's been faded out, and these islands have changed. But here again, you can see the North Pole in this map as well. And Iceland is called Island. And we can see it here, Iceland and Greenland. And here I believe we can see Friesland. So Friesland is still here. And even another island that's pretty much close to the east coast of Canada. And you know, I encourage you to pull these videos up and study them for yourselves. I mean, they're really, really fascinating. And especially these areas where, you know, if you look on Google now, you know, I mean, what are you going to get when you look at Greenland? Here's what you're going to get. And I don't really think this, we're seeing what we're seeing. I think this is just kind of imposed over. I mean, this doesn't look, and I've played around with Antarctica, and you'll see pure ice, and then if you zoom in and allow it to load a little bit, and it's doing it a little bit here, things will load. And I've actually pulled up lakes and green mountains in Antarctica, and I've done the same thing with the deserts in Nevada, where it looks like just a bleak, white kind of tan desert, and then you zoom in and there's all sorts of amazing things. But yeah, I find it fascinating that, you know, these older maps completely show all the rivers, and I mean, we get a better picture of what's really going on from these older maps than we do from these Google images, that's for sure. And of course, our North Polar region is completely missing. And I don't know. I mean, I think, what are we really looking at here? I mean, what has Google given us? But I find it interesting that there is no imagery here. But yet, if you go over here, there's a little trick that I've seen. I saw it on YouTube, and you can go to this little island here, pretty much in between Alaska and that Siberian region. You just zoom into this little island here, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know if someone was leaving us this as a little clue, but this thing goes on, and I think it goes right to the North Pole, and I followed it, and I don't know if I'll do too much of it right now, and you can go back and do this yourself. But it appears, you know, I mean, this line looks more realistic than this blue. Now it turns into two lines. And yeah, I don't know if that's an error or if it was a little gift. But yes, I mean, I think that, you know, and I don't know how much we can really zoom in. But yeah, there's activity here. There's action, as there has been shown in all of these older maps. So it's pretty fun, actually. I'd encourage you to go take a little trip down this line here, and it's very much full of more truth than I think what we see here. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Have a blessed day.
You a dreamer? Yeah. I haven't seen too many of you around lately. It's been tough lately for dreamers. say dreaming's dead. No one does it anymore.